come before us. No political thinker in India is so original as to come up with an entirely new philosophy for Indian civilization. That would be too radical. But I think great Indian novelists of the last 100 years did amazing work in thinking of a vision for Indian society. And somehow, because they wrote in the novel form, yet we find the temptation of many intellectuals to write novels, such as beginning with the spiritual patron of this festival, Francisco Luis Gomes. There's always a temptation in any thinker's work, no matter how ideological you are, to, in the end, come down to the level of a story, because, you know, you cannot incarnate ideas without persons. And then this is, I think, the secret of the novel. That attracts everybody to it. Can you perhaps even hear me? No, go for it. Take the mic. There's a recording. That's one. My second reason for being very happy to be here is that, you know, Vivek means many things to me. We go back quite a long time, but among other things, he's... hate to make up a new term, it sounds so terrible. He's my mangoed father. And many years ago, when I was writing this piece on Indian mangoes, he said, you know, and this is, I think we share this spirit. We belong to the different coasts of India, Goa and Orissa, and we feel that our little state is the best place in the world and no place is better. So he said the best mangoes of India, unquestionably in Goa. And I said, how can you, you know? But when I arrived exactly this day, 4 years ago, May 30, I woke up the next morning, I went to Panjim Municipal Market and bought a large stash of Fernandins, Musarats, Mankurats, and went home. And I spent the rest of the day in this ecstasy. You know, I'd lived in Bombay for 20 years of my life without ever having tasted a single one of these delights. And since then, you know, to me, coming to Goa in the last week of May and the first week of June, to mix, you know, literature, a bit of alcohol, mangoes, gulmohar, and walking on D.B. Bandodkar Marg is, to me, the idea of the greatest happiness one can have in the last week of May. So very well chosen for the dates of the festival. Now to get to my real theme, perhaps I'll preface it with a little story that takes up from little things I've heard at this festival today, and also some of the absences of this festival. You know, I'm a little bit upset. I realized for the first time this insight showed me that I myself don't think of myself as a young person anymore. I thought there's not enough young people at this festival for whatever reason. That insight immediately led to the second idea that, you know, like, therefore I don't think of myself as young. But recently I met a lot of young people. I went to this library in Dumka in Jharkhand, where this friend of mine, a great figure in Indian letters, next year we should have him, the greatest bookseller of India today, Akshay Rautray of Bhubaneswar. He was restoring an old mobile library that the state administration had bought in the 1950s, an American Fargo truck, which at the time they used to use as a resource to take books out into the villages of what was then Bihar, and on a monthly rota, where you could go and give books out to people, and people could subscribe and order them and give them back when it came the next month. And that, I think, is a little image of the idealism of our post-independence years, that education had to be taken out to the masses no matter what the expense was. And since this book van was attached to a library, I went one day to the reading room of the library, fully expecting to see the same state as any reading room in any public library in India. One or two people, you know, reading a newspaper, etc. I found a sea of young people with their heads bent over their books, and I thought, this is so wonderful, so refreshing to see. And thankfully, you know, there's always a little skeptic in every middle-aged person's mind saying, are they really reading? Now that I'm a parent, I also know this. Like, is it acting or are they really reading? And I went down the line, and all the students in a library full of 40,000 great books of literature, all the students were reading books that they themselves had brought in their bags, which was readers and primers for the competitive exams. They used the reading room as an air-conditioned resource to come and relax during the day and sit together, perhaps as motivation as well. Everybody else is studying, I also need to study. But there was no link at all to the literature all around them, which were in these books full of, in these cabinets which had not been opened. Many of the books the cover had not been taken off. And I felt, you know, what Rakshanda was saying just recently, and the idea also of education that we have somehow managed to, the broad-based Indian society, that the only knowledge you need is the books, is from textbooks and not books. And so from all these experiences, somewhere, you know, I had the sense that by some great accident of my life, there is some benevolent God in my universe, or perhaps literature itself is that God. Somehow in my 20s, having nothing else to do in life and having no idea what to do, I ended up in the most random and yet in some ways the most pleasurable of all professions, one that allows you to, do your work while lying down, to use the daylight hours to wander around the city instead of going to work, and to take naps in the afternoon. This profession, although very badly paid, was that of a book reviewer. And coming out of university and feeling profoundly uncomfortable in the world after 2 years of being a cricket writer in Bombay, I just thought I can't take it anymore. Just going to office and commuting for hours a day, every day, and coming home and the whole day begins again. I just couldn't see the sense of what adult life was supposed to be about. And I decided to give up my job. And the only thing I knew how to do because of my literary education was to write about books. And I thought, let's see where this goes. And from there began, I think, a chapter in my life that continues to this day. And last year, I suddenly was in Bangalore during the lockdown, and there was no chance of going anywhere for months on end. And I decided to, make a virtue of a necessity. And I put together the best essays that I felt I'd written over the last 17 or 18 years into a collection called My Country's Literature. And thinking that perhaps it would be a little too dry for just a reader to suddenly pick up, and there's no thread to the essays. Each essay is by definition about something different because it's about the particular moral vision, the stylistic qualities, and the aesthetic value of a particular writer. There's 60 writers. I thought I would write for those young people, any person who has written a book review and has felt some pleasure in it. I thought I would write a little memoir of my life in my 20s as a jobbing literary critic, as a record of pleasure and a strange kind of, it has a very particular atmosphere that it would be hard to explain without you also reading it. But in the main, I wanted to reflect on the fact that, and it's an irony how fast time moves these days. 20 years ago, I used to think of myself, and when I would sit with my friends talking, I first left India at the age of 20 when I got a scholarship to go to Cambridge. To me, suddenly to walk into West End bookshop, and all the names that one had heard, one's family members and friends talk about, romantically, the Cuban writers, the obscure French writers, that to find them all in a bookshop was to be as wealthy as one could ever hope to be in life. And at that time, my working theory as a writer was that, this is the greatest age in the history of literature. Small enough so that we can all read each other's novels and each other's creation. And there was always a gap. Those of you who used to collect music would also know in the 1990s. You heard about a musician, you could never listen to them. And there was always a gap between knowing, wanting and getting. Suddenly, you could just ask your friends or find out from somewhere. Everything was accessible. And I thought we must be the luckiest readers in the history of literature. Whoever we want to read, we can. I think between that feeling of 2000 and to be a reader in 2020, where even despite a history of having read throughout your life, suddenly you find you can't focus for more than 10 minutes. If you read a nice sentence, you must immediately take a picture on your phone and then post it on Instagram to show that you loved it, and somebody else must like it for your reading to be validated. That you can't spend 2 or 3 hours by yourself. That even the idea of a book, you have to go around hopelessly explaining to people this is something of relevance. There is knowledge in here, as Rakshanda was saying, that there is such a thing as deep knowledge. Or a question paper, there is something like a deep encounter, and the biggest thing of all, which I also write about in this book, isn't it? I had a Danish girlfriend about 10 years ago, a wonderful person in a way, like one of my many educators in life who said, we were talking one day about how in music, every 5-6 years, once there's audio cassette, then moves to CDs, then moves to streaming, then to Napster. What's going on? You can't focus on anything, you can't settle down anywhere, the next disruption arrives. And she said, and I agree with her to this day, her English was slightly broken because Danish was her first language. Chandras, the book is a genius technology. Whatever they made in 1300 or 1400, 600 years later, is substantially unchanged. And it is true. I don't know who first thought that a book should be 2 pages facing each other. When you look back at it now, there could be many other ways of organizing information in a book. But that very model, you can easily recognize a 14th century book and one printed today. And That to me seemed, that magic that is there when, these days is all about curation and watching things that other people are watching. What has always struck me as wonderful about literature is that you're totally in a world by yourself and you have total power to determine the trajectory of your own reading life. And if you are in search of unknown writers and unknown experiences, there's no end to that for your entire life. You can start today and still be going strong 50 years from now. And to me, that is what is most attractive about a book, that you can open a page and suddenly the voice you are hearing is somebody's voice from 700 years ago, if you so wish it. And there's a direct sort of drop of those words and those thoughts straight into your brain, and across the boundaries of space and time, you're talking to one another with nobody else. It's a pure interpersonal human encounter with all other difficulties erased. And to think that, when you spend so much of our lives actually trying to have this quality of encounter with actual people in our spaces, it seems something miraculous about books, that you can bypass all of that. I think that explains the power of books for many slightly introverted people, such as myself in my teens, which is that, you don't need to work. So there's something profoundly understanding about a book that says, I understand who you are are not going to be taking the lead in this encounter. You sit where you are, just keep turning the pages around and paying attention, and I will show you how to live, how to think, how to look at the world. And that's why I thought I would read, perhaps, since I'm a novelist, even in literary criticism, I favor writing about novels, although I think as a literary critic, one should have the ability to write about any book that comes your way. But since, again, we're in an era, there are a few novelists in this room, I think we all feel a sense that our long age of being this central form in literature is coming to an end, and I know many novelists who write primarily in order to be filmed shortly after. So I want to go back to some pure form of the novel as novel, that there's no, I was at another festival recently where I was very attracted by a social thinker who said we need to stop thinking of our resources as extractable. Let's go back to thinking of a river as a river, a mountain as a mountain, and land as land. There's something very powerful about this very simple thought. And the same way, I think everybody who loves something wants to say, let's go back to thinking about it not as a pathway to something else. A novel is a novel, and what you will gain from novels, you will only find out by reading novels. And what you can find out is, I try to say in a page or two, what novels can do that other things can't, for your education, for your soul, whatever. So I'm going to read perhaps a couple of pages, if you don't mind. This is from the introduction to the book. And now to the novel, my favorite subject of all, i.e., this is going to take some time. The novel is an astonishing literary invention raised over 3 centuries to ever new heights by hundreds of ardent and passionate practitioners. It is a very capacious, amiable form. It participates in both the quotidian and the ethereal parts of life. From my early 20s onwards, I began to feel that, although I loved all kinds of literature, it was novels that had the first claim on my allegiance. Individual novels can be highly partial to certain moods and subjects, but the novel in general leans towards large-heartedness, complexity, contrast, self-awareness, skepticism, a dissembling sophistication, and a shambling grace. I think the classic text on these aspects of the novel is Milan Kundera's trilogy on the novel. Testaments Betrayed, The Art of the Novel, and something else I forget. In novels, the passions and sentiments of characters are balanced by the commentary and rumination of narrators. Scenes of solitude and private life are set in counterpoint to the world of the street and of society. Magisterial language and highly polished sentences are combined with naturalistic speech and street slang. Meaning is met at the level of human drama and also by the form in which the story is cast, by who is doing the telling. The novel is also a sophisticated time machine. In a good novel, the flow of life, highly contingent and unstable, can be experienced on the page. The experience of time is intensified, and all the banal moments and longers of real life are ruthlessly weeded out. Here was life, I thought to myself, as I marked up and knocked back a novel every few days. The flow of artfully constructed verbal pictures in novelistic narration was rapid and vivifying. The precisely tuned sentences quickened the pulse, they stung the conscience, and created the thirst for experience. The more novels I read, the hungrier I became to read more, to live life, or at least a couple of hours of every day, with the heightened sense of intensity and significance that they conjured up. The sense of reassurance provided by novels was amazing, like that given to a country by a strong central bank. No matter how long one lived, one would never run out of great novels to read. And even better, novels could provide for acutely self-conscious souls such as myself a liberating escape from the self. In novels, you could get into the minds of other human beings and stay there until you could see reality as much through their eyes as your own. In effect, you became a compound human being, both yourself and someone else. The last page of a novel often felt to me like a devastating farewell from one or all, of the protagonist, narrator, or the writer. Sometimes you could not tell which one. And just like in life, reality in novels did not easily give away its secrets. To pierce the veil of reality of novels was to gain confidence in doing the same at some point in life. Who knows how long it would take. You had to work out the code of the book, tune your own receptors to the pitch of the writing, piece together the narrator's worldview from the shards of observation about characters, be alive to the play of irony, the meanings of certain juxtapositions, cuts, and switches of perspective. Novels were written to be read, but novels were themselves readers. They read and interpreted the people within the narrative field, and they also supplied the means to read entire cultures, the lives of distant countries that one might never visit. There was a time in life when you met lots of older people in India who claimed to know everything about Russia because they read Dostoevsky, Chekhov, and Tolstoy, and there was something very charming, I think, about this. You know, that you felt this confidence only from reading 4 or 5 writers that you need everything about a country without having to go there. And it is true, there are some secrets of spiritual experience that you don't need the actual data about countries to know that. Last paragraph. The novel Literary History tells us had its beginnings in the birth of modernity in the West. In societies like India and Egypt, Brazil and Korea, it was a transplant. But what did that matter? Wherever the novel went, it merged with that world's indigenous storytelling traditions and reappeared with a new face and form, a new way of being. It was a literary version of the traveler who makes himself at home anywhere he or she goes. Thank you so much. Vivek, 5 or 7 minutes more? You know, in a way, I found myself very ideally placed to sort of, in midlife, to sort of look back at my past and also laugh a bit at myself, you know, and the things I used to do. In a way, I think book reviewing is not really for older people because by that time, you know, like Prayag's age and mine, you know too many people, you've read too many books, you're too focused on your own work to care, and you don't have that capacity for totally engaged experience, you know, to live week by week in the mind of some other writer. And so I realized that in that sense my career is over. But that's why I felt like a very good time in order to, and I really feel if you're a writer today, you want to be, and you're a young person wanting to be a writer, there's no better education than the random ones of having books come your way, float across your path, and trying to pay attention to each one of them, and do your best in trying to reveal what is unique about each book. Sometimes people ask me, you know, how should I study to become a writer? Increasingly, like every writer, I teach writing rather than teach literature. I say, well, the thing to do actually is to read books, and whenever you feel yourself impressed by a sentence or a paragraph, take a notebook of your own, I always have one in my bag, and copy it out. And sometimes they say, well, how far can I get just by copying out other writers? You know, writing is about originality, not about imitation. And the answer to that is, sadly, the writing of originality comes by deep initiation and the experience of imitating other people's work. And because we are such experienced readers, actually the speed of our eye and the ease with which we speak language means that sometimes when we read books, we don't pay enough attention. And as soon as you take a book you like, maybe you've read 100 times, and just copy out the first paragraph of the book, which you also might have read 100 times, immediately, because of the slowness of the hand, you will immediately realize there's so many secrets in it that you never got to, because you thought maybe a comma comes in the first sentence after word 4. It doesn't. It comes a bit further down the line. And there's many things that you can only learn from rewriting your own work and somebody else's. And in these ways, I think being a book critic was very useful for my education, because in copying out those great sentences of other writers from all over the world. And that's why I felt when I wanted to put together this book, I didn't want it to be about any one literary culture at all. I wanted it to be about that entire sense of unbounded freedom that readers feel when you feel that, you know, Goa is home, India is home, the world is home, every other continent is home. In the world of books, there's not necessarily any local or universal. There's not that opposition. Of course, you read your own writers with a certain, and I feel especially today, now that books from all over the world are available, that we don't read our own writers. Young Indian readers who even love novels don't read the great Indian Bhasha writers in translation. And we are losing something because of that, because there's a wealth of knowledge even about how to be an Indian in the first century of Indian democracy that is there in these books. That's why in the beginning I've tried to put the essays of the great Indian novelists who I think are most ignored. They are leading the line, Yashpal, Gopinath Mohanty, Fakir Mohan Senapati, Vibhuti Bhushan, all these writers who I feel every Indian who thinks and loves stories should read. Why should you deny yourself this great privilege? So this was a little attempt by me to rebalance the field or to present my own version of what I think is great. But I also felt, there's something about literary criticism today, especially for those who read it or practice it professionally. It's so serious, so morose, and so prescriptive and unidimensional in its tone. I felt without some sense of laughter and irony in literary criticism, even that, I think is heading towards, academic literary criticism is heading towards a terrible, terrible impasse, in my view. What with also letting texts go by and thinking more in terms of political ideas. I felt, it would be wrong for me to reprise my own past in literature without showing how foolish or pointlessly bloody-minded I was. And I thought, I would reproduce some of my correspondence from the time. When I was 25 or 26, by the way, if you ever review books, one of the wonderful things about reviewing books is that for 2 or 3 days of your life, you are the king or queen of that writer. I know this sounds strange, but it was a shock to me when I first got my first reviewing assignment for the Washington Post when I was 23, how excited I was, that you think you're going to get the book, but it's not the book. It's a strange, it looks like the files that your parents used to bring home from office. It's a galley. So it doesn't have a cover. It's just paper, the text of the book with single tone covers, and you're a bit disappointed. It's not the book that you wanted. You've got to read that. And then there's all sorts of negotiations that take place. You might have the greatest ideas in the world, but if you can't put them into 700 words, which is the room that you've been given, they'll all be ruthlessly cut out by someone else, and then you'll be the one complaining that, my ideas are not respected. This happened to me hundreds of times. So you learn that above all, respect the word count, not the writer or the book. And sometimes, even in respecting the word count, there's always that last stage. You feel you've done a very good piece of work, you send it in, and then you're waiting for Saturday or Sunday. This is the most dramatic point in your entire year. Sad. It's very sad in some respects, but that's how it is. And the review comes out, and you open the newspaper, and for 4 years I was the book critic of Mint Lounge. This was the high point of my week. Saturday, run down to the newspaper wala and pick it up and read your own review. Does it still look good on the page? And sometimes you start thinking, oh, this is good, but something is missing. You can't sit down to actually count all the words. That would be, but something is missing. And then suddenly strikes you, yes, I know what is missing. And I'll read you one bit of, I used to get so angry. This is an exchange with the legendary newspaper book review editor of The Observer, Robert McCrum, who was very, very kind to me in my 20s and would give me all these assignments and would listen to me, would receive emails like this from me the next day, which he took with great patience. I thought I'd just copy out the email. Chandrahas Chaudhary, Monday, June 4, 2007 at 2:18 p.m. to Robert McCrum. Robert.mccrum@observer.co.uk. You can still write to him, I'm sure. Hi, Robert. Modestly. This word was missing from the last line of my piece. The whole point of the piece, I think, was that the book was modestly good, and that's what I said. But as it came out, you just said it was good. With that word cut out of the last sentence, it felt as if I had overpraised it. Yours, Chandrahas. I was so angry for this one word. I was horrified that somebody should think I'm saying a book is very good and I don't think it's very good. Reply came at 2:35 p.m. Only 17 minutes it took him to reply. Robert McCrum to Chandrahas. Dear Chandrahas, no, with the word cut out, you made your point well and not too pompously. As published, it was a good review. Thank you, RMC. What can I say to something like that? You've been put in your place, but in a very gentle way, and you realize you can't get so worked up about things. Yes, it was Khaled Hosseini. It was a bit pompous, I agree. It was a bit pompous. So my last thing before I finish is, the last thing I thought, the elephant in the room, the many elephants in the room have been addressed today, communalism being one of them. There are other slightly smaller elephants, baby elephants. And one of them is this entire question which animates every reader, perhaps at every stage of your life. What eventually is the relationship between literature and life? It's a bigger question even than literature itself. And as it should be, because the dialogue between literature and life is what makes us read in the first place. And at different stages of our life, we have different answers to this question. And at some point, you begin to wonder, although you are praised for writing about books and for writing books and for being in the world of books, are you sort of making books a kind of shield so as to stop engaging with the world that is beyond books? And I have to say, at some point, I asked myself this question in my early 30s, and regretfully, the answer I came to was yes, I am. I am thinking of books as more important than life or as people. And I had to start thinking of not necessarily how to, I was still mainly a book critic, so I had to still write 30 or 40 pieces a year. But I had to start thinking of how to rebalance my life, and that's why I said in the previous session that I didn't mean objectively Delhi is the greatest city in the world. It's one of the worst. But for me, Delhi is the greatest city in the world because of a certain way I found that in Delhi, from learning from different people, of balancing out life and literature. I'm going to finish, therefore, not talking about books, but I'm going to read a page and a half from the story of a writer's life lived in Delhi, in a Barsati, in a very long tradition that I was very happy to join. Yes. Bear with me for 5 minutes and I'll be done. It's 2 pages. But sooner or later, I would have to face up to the truth that if books show us how to love and understand people, as I believe they do, then it would be tragic, a refutation of the very power and grace that we ascribe to literature, if they did not lead us to a renewed engagement with people. And so I launched a new ship from the harbor of literature, perhaps later than I should have, given my privileges and education, but thankfully not too late. I found love again in my 30s, several times, on terms very different from the romantic relationships of my 20s. I moved cities and found a little apartment in Kalkaji in South Delhi to live in. It was for one person only, my landlady said. And the official reason for that was that the water tank, which was common to the entire building, would not bear the demands of a second resident or even a second visitor. And I agreed wholeheartedly. I wanted all rights over my space. Of course, hundreds of other writers lived there with me, but I was the only one who needed to shower. Nor did I stay home much. Novels and the indigence of my 20s had fired in me a great hunger for travel. Suddenly, fate waved a magic wand. I had the luck to see distant parts of the world on residencies and fellowships. Sometimes I came home, put down my suitcase for a day or two, unpacked all the books I'd picked up from the great second-hand bookshops of the world, Strand in New York, Scoob and Henry Portes in London, Halpers in Tel Aviv, Blossoms in Bangalore, and then I set out again on a journey of my own fashioning and often funding. For a few years, work of all kinds poured in. Much of it had very little to do with books, but having spent so much of my 20s pleading with people for work, I rarely said no. I began work on a new novel, Clouds, that would take me 7 years to write. For the first time, I realized that sometimes in order to write a book, you must let the book write you first, to take you to places where you can change and grow. I began to cook with great interest and commitment and to invite people home to dinner parties once a week. Sadly, one of the few people who almost came and didn't come was Rakshanda. I think she was busy with her daughter's exam and now they've left that house. It will never happen again. A missed dinner. I took to heart Adam Smith's thought, partly observation, partly command, in the theory of moral sentiments, that man, by which he meant human beings, by the way, not just man, that man was meant for action and to promote by the exertion of his faculties such changes in the external circumstances, both of himself and of others, as may seem most favorable to the happiness of all. Also a good definition of what you should do with the country, which we have forgotten. I like the peace and solitude of my one-room apartment, the company of my beloved books and my closest friends, and then the rush of novelty, of high spirits and deep conversations, of people mixing in my space, browsing my books. I even allowed them to borrow one on 2 occasions, and then leaving behind memories. So long resistant to being drawn out, as reticent and impassive as a closed book, made nervous and even jealous by people more at ease with life than me, I now took pleasure and even pride in reaching out to people. I tried to leave people in no doubt that I loved them, both by concrete action and exertion, and sometimes by discreet inaction, such as by never judging them by their reading. Of course, it was very hard and very spiritually ennobling work when someone's favorite novel turned out to be The Alchemist, The Fountainhead, or One Night at the Call Center. But I still somehow managed. Last paragraph. I began to ruminate on the relationship of laughter to hope and healing. I'd always loved the play of the comic spirit in literature. The cackling, bantering narrators in the novels of Bohemil Hrabal, the warm mockery of George Amado, the fantastic setups and boisterous hijinks of Cervantes and Lawrence Stern, the salty chirruping of Fakir Mohan Senapati, the impish tenderness of Isaac Bashevis Singer. Increasingly, I found myself living my own life as a comedy, laughing at my past trials and tribulations, acknowledging the quirks, hang-ups, and illusions that had made me such a challenging romantic partner and even friend, plunging headfirst into the past or plotting my glorious future in certain exquisite hours of reminiscence and reverie in bed or under the boughs of the peepal tree outside my house. A little cafe full of tweeting birds, the correct tweeters, a cafe full of tweeting birds and scrambling squirrels that shielded my apartment from the harsh Delhi sun and snoopy neighbors. Sometimes, I just sat there in the center of my room, looking at my books, absorbing their vibrations like some sort of new age spiritual guru, taking them in not as language, but as a wordless love, a silent communion of kindred spirits. Yes, what a country is literature. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chandrahas. Thank you so much, Chandrahas.
Somehow I tried not to end up in tears, but I don't know why I do. So I think I might be allowed to, weep a tear too.
It's very beautiful, and thank you so much for doing that. What a way to end the festival. I want to introduce, who I have not yet introduced throughout the entire festival, Martin Tokchom, who belongs to your country of literature.
I see.
And he's come all the way. He runs the fabulous Ukiyo bookshop in Imphal. I'm a big fan of it, and a very brave festival, and he has literally paid his own way to come here for this event because he belongs to this country of literature.
Wonderful. I think we should have a round of applause even for someone like that. Without our booksellers, we're nowhere.
Martin Tokchom. You have Anchal Malhotra, who's come from Delhi and written a marvelous new book. You have Jane Borges has... Yes, she's come for the...
One dinner,
Jane
that's right.
Borges had her launch. Ajay Kamalakaran's book is going to be out, I'm sure soon, if not more of them. Patricia Mukim, who will be speaking later as a valedictory. Lou Majao, book should be written about him. Features as a major character in Anjum Hassan's
right.
marvelous book. And we're surrounded. Jerry Pinto, what book has he not written?
Yes.
His country is also literature. You do not know Mr. Daulat Havaldar, but I urge you to befriend him on Facebook.
I will.
He comments most profoundly on literature. His country is also literature. And of course, you have here Chandra Mohan S., whose poems are going to be read today. You have Akhu, whose work, most poetic literary work we heard yesterday. He wrote a song just for Goa, I think. Mr. President is coming because Mr. President came today. Kind of, yes, he did. And of course, Prayag Akbar and Rakshanda Jalil, who is literature. So
absolutely,
we are surrounded,
absolutely.
We are in a family. Thank you so much, brother, for saying that. We belong to your country. Thank you. The first Liberty and Arts, Liberty and Arts again. Liberty and Light Festival of Goa is hereby declared closed, except for the party in the evening at the old GMC building.
Thank you so much. Any writer cannot leave without having the last word, and I think we should. The only reason, I really admire Vivek for everything he does. The only reason why, as a writer, I feel worried for him is that he has his hand in so many pies that whenever I meet him in the last 10 years, he's almost finished this book that he's been talking to me about. And yet it never seems to come out. And so I may pray perhaps, and perhaps you can all join me in saying take 2 or 3 months off and do not organize anything. We'll take care of ourselves and come back next year. We want you to be talking about your book. But in the meantime, thank you so much for bringing us all here. among the most pleasurable days of my life. You know, very, very long time, and especially after the pandemic, certainly something to. Once we can get a mango, we can get a picture of me and my godfather. Till then, yes. Thank you so much, and onward to whatever next.
All the best. Thank you guys for being here. It meant a lot, really. Shweta, I must mention, has been here from beginning to the end of all 3 days. This is why we do it, right? Because people pay attention and care about it. Please join us this evening for the end of the event, which will be a poetry reading, a valedictory address. Dule Rocker makes his debut in Goa, followed by Braz Gonçalves, who's 88 years old, who just returned from Portugal, and a triumphal tour will be having a concert with his grandson, who's a saxophone player, as well as his